So we were going to some kind of party at a warehouse. It wasn't like a rave, it was like a. It felt more like a wedding reception. There was a variety of people of different ages there. There wasn't particularly loud music or anything like that. And at a certain point, however, police or representatives of some kind of authority arrived and started trying to shut down the party. They started pushing barricades in so that we had to get out. All the while that this is happening, in the next warehouse along, a bunch of people who looked like raiders from Fallout 4 were keeping children in neck collars and sort of lording it over them with machine guns and things like that, which I would have thought was a much more serious problem, but the police seemed much more concerned to shut down this party. Everyone got scattered as a result of this, and we wandered around various areas. We came across a place that looked sort of like a cafe or a shop from a garden centre where a bunch of people from the party settled down, a bunch of people who weren't but who'd somehow got involved. I remember trying to shoplift some chocolate bars from the shop as some kind of protest against the police, but I wasn't successful because it was difficult to get them when no one else was looking. So I was frustrated and walked out. I was wearing my big coat with big pockets, and I found on the ground a cleaver, and I put that into one of the pockets, and it just about hit it. And I remember thinking, right, first thing I'm going to do when I can find my way back is get those guys who were next door and sort them out. But when I actually got out of the warehouse, I started walking around, and we seemed to be by the time, but it was very, very... It felt somehow like it was in the Team Valley area, but it was extremely built up, and everything that was built up around it was some kind of weird fun fair. Like it was a really bizarre, like, there were tons and tons of different things, and none of them really made a lot of sense. There were, they weren't sort of like straightforward. I think the most straightforward thing was some dodgems, but even that was kind of weird, and it was all sloping up. I remember everything was on this sort of up slope, and there were a lot of sort of people who seemed to be drunk, people who were being very sort of boisterous, and so I was just trying to get through all of this and avoid getting into any kind of situations with them, especially given, that I was trying to keep the fact that I had this cleaver on me secret. And I then wandered further up, and I found just an area where there seemed to just be a lot of people sleeping, and I pretended to sleep next to someone, and then everything kicked off with a bunch of people separately to me. This seemed to be something that had either been replanned or whatever, but I was able to use that to escape, and I ran out, and I found that there was this huge bridge, which seemed to actually, some of the stuff from the fun fair was inside this bridge, but I was trying to follow someone at this point, and they'd gone down in one direction, and the only way I could follow them was to actually walk over the top of this bridge, which was a very unsafe structure and was incredibly steep. At one point I actually had a choice between walking over the slightly rickety there was a sort of mesh structure across the top of the bridge, which might have supported my weight, but I wasn't sure. Or there were steps, and both were impossibly steep. And I just remember thinking, getting scared of the height and going down, and to try and sort of find some other way, or to try and find a way of following from inside the bridge. But when I got to the bottom, I found myself in another of the funfair places, but then I actually went outside of that, and I was again on rooftops, but it seemed to be like a rooftop of a train station. It had that kind of, I don't know what it's called, but there's a sort of thing that you see on some old roofs of buildings from like the 50s and the 60s, which is a bit speckly, and it seems to be like a material, like a treated material that they use to keep rain out. It was like that in waves, sort of arcs, sort of little ripples going along the top of it. And I at this point I wasn't wearing my coat. I was just in my pants, and I don't quite know how that had happened. And then I looked up and I realised there was no one around, and there was a giant black building, like a big industrial type building or something, like huge Gotham City type architecture. And I remember looking at it, and I noticed that all of the windows were either bricked up or blacked out. You could see where windows had been, but you could also see that there were no windows now. And I got a very disturbing vibe from this building. And at that point, I woke up. So, yeah. Steep bridges and bricked up buildings.